April 1945, Okinawa Prefecture. The morning air tasted of salt and ash. In the stone corridors of Himeyuri Girls' High School, 16-year-old Yoshiko Sakamoto tied her white headband with trembling fingers. Outside, the American artillery rumbled like distant thunder, closer now than yesterday, closer than this morning. The fabric pressed against her forehead bore no slogan, no patriotic verse, just her name, written in her mother's careful brushstrokes 3 days ago, before the soldiers came. In her other hand, she held something that weighed far more than its 800 grams, a Type 97 hand grenade. Cold, grooved metal that bit into her palm. The pin glinted in the dim light filtering through the shattered windows. She had never held a weapon before last Tuesday. Now she carried one as though it were a textbook. Across the room, 219 other girls adjusted their own headbands. Their school uniforms, navy blue sailor collars, carefully pressed, had become something else now. Not costumes for learning, uniforms for dying. The youngest was 12 years old. This is not a story about soldiers. This is a story about what happens when a nation, staring into the abyss of defeat, decides that even its children must become ammunition. This is the story of how an empire, built on the mythology of divine invincibility, asked its daughters to transform their bodies into final acts of resistance. And this is the story of the terrible arithmetic that declared a girl's life worth exactly one American soldier, if she could get close enough before pulling the pin. The road to this classroom did not begin on Okinawa. It began decades earlier in the architecture of an educational system designed not merely to teach, but to forge a generation willing to die without question. Since the Meiji Restoration, Japanese education served dual purposes: literacy and loyalty. By the 1930s, that loyalty had calcified into something far more absolute. The 1890 Imperial Rescript on Education, memorized by every schoolchild, declared that citizens must offer yourselves courageously to the state and guard and maintain the prosperity of our imperial throne. Not metaphorically, literally. In elementary schools across the Japanese Empire, children as young as 6 recited these words each morning, bowing toward the emperor's portrait enshrined in every classroom. By middle school, boys trained with wooden rifles, girls practiced field nursing and learned to operate radio equipment. The curriculum called it moral education. Western observers called it indoctrination. Both were correct. But even indoctrination requires escalation when the war begins to collapse inward. By 1944, as American forces methodically captured island after island across the Pacific, the Japanese military faced a mathematics problem it could not solve through conventional means. Each defensive perimeter fell faster than the last. Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu. The losses weren't sustainable. Industrial output couldn't replace the aircraft. The merchant marine couldn't deliver supplies through the submarine blockade. And the population of military-aged men willing to die in bonsai charges, while still substantial, was finally, terribly, beginning to run short. So the definition of military-aged expanded. In June 1944, the Imperial Japanese Army implemented the National Mobilization Law's most extreme provisions. The Student Mobilization Order lowered the conscription age and, crucially, redefined civilian education institutions as rear defense assets. Schools became barracks, classrooms became armories, and teachers became officers in everything but name. The girls of Okinawa's high schools received their orders in March 1945 as the American fleet gathered on the horizon. They would form the Himeyuri Student Corps, Princess Lily, a designation that managed to be both poetic and grotesque. Their mission? Serve as battlefield nurses in the limestone caves beneath Okinawa's southern hills, where the Japanese 32nd Army prepared its final defense. 222 students, 18 teachers, navy blue uniforms stained with red crosses painted in pig's blood because proper medic insignia were no longer available. They descended into the caves carrying bandages, rice, and almost no medical training beyond basic first aid. They did not yet carry grenades. That would come later. The Americans expected resistance on Okinawa. They did not expect what they found. Operation Iceberg commenced on April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, with the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. 183,000 troops, 1,600 ships. The preliminary bombardment was so intense that it liquefied the topsoil in some areas, turning rice paddies into bogs of pulverized earth. And for the first 2 days, they met almost no resistance. The Japanese had learned from previous island battles that contesting the beaches was suicide. American naval gunfire and air superiority made any defensive line within sight of the ocean a temporary arrangement at best. So Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commanding the 32nd Army, adopted a different strategy: defense in depth. Pull back to the island's southern highlands, fortify the limestone caves and ancient tombs, force the Americans into close-quarters combat where their technological advantages, artillery, armor, air support, would matter less, and wait. The students of the Himeyuri Corps waited with them in surgical caves that quickly became charnel houses. The first wounded soldiers arrived on April 4th, then a dozen more, then hundreds. Men with faces burned away by flamethrowers. Men missing limbs, the stumps wrapped in shredded uniforms because gauze ran out on the second day. Men who screamed so constantly that the girls learned to tune out the sound, the way one stops hearing rain. Yoshiko Sakamoto's diary, recovered decades later from a sealed section of cave, recorded the transformation in stark entries. April 6th, we sang songs while treating patients. Major Ueda said we were brave. I felt proud. April 12th. The morphine is gone. We use sake now. It doesn't work. I held a soldier's hand while they amputated his leg with a field saw. He broke 2 of my fingers. April 19th. Fumiko died. A shell collapsed the north tunnel. We couldn't dig her out before the air went bad. I can still hear her calling for her mother. April 27th. I don't remember what my mother's face looks like. The cave networks were supposed to be sanctuary. They became tombs that kept breathing. American forces employed a systematic method for neutralizing cave defenses: explosives, flamethrowers, and a grim willingness to seal entrances with bulldozed earth if the occupants refused to surrender. From their perspective, the caves weren't field hospitals. Intelligence suggested they were command posts, ammunition depots, staging areas for nighttime counterattacks. And they were right. The Japanese military made no distinction between medical and combat facilities. The Himeyuri Corps' caves doubled as ammunition storage. Surgical stations sat 30 feet from artillery positions. The laws of war became hypothetical when the artillery responded to surrender offers with mortar fire. By late May, as American forces pressed south toward the final defensive lines, the limestone caves that had offered protection became inescapable traps. Naval artillery could collapse entrances, smoke grenades could suffocate entire tunnel systems, and the American infantry, after 6 weeks of brutal cave-to-cave combat, had stopped checking whether shadows in the darkness carried weapons or bandages. It was in this context, trapped, surrounded, with American forces converging, that the Imperial Japanese Army made a decision that would haunt Okinawa's collective memory for generations. They distributed grenades to the schoolgirls. The official order came through Major Ueda on May 30th, though the groundwork had been laid for weeks. The concept was presented not as murder, but as mercy, as honor. Gyokusai, shattering like a jewel. The term had ancient roots in samurai culture, describing a warrior's death in battle, beautiful, complete, preferable to the shame of capture. By 1945, it had been weaponized by the Imperial propaganda apparatus into a civic virtue. Radio broadcasts celebrated soldiers who fought to the last man. Newspapers printed poems about the honor of death over surrender. Elementary school textbooks taught that capture by the enemy meant torture, rape, and desecration, that American soldiers were demons who would violate every principle of human decency. The girls had heard these stories their entire lives. Now they were told the Americans were close enough to hear their breathing. Major Ueda assembled the surviving Himeyuri Corps members on the morning of May 30th, fewer than 200 now, disease and bombardment having claimed the rest. He stood in the central cave chamber, his uniform so stained with blood and cave mud that the insignia were invisible. Behind him, several soldiers held wooden crates stenciled with kanji, Type 97 hand grenade. He explained that the situation had become untenable. The American cordon would tighten within days. Escape was impossible. Continued resistance in the caves would only prolong suffering. But there was, he said, one way they could still serve the emperor, one final act of loyalty. He did not use the word suicide, he said glorious sacrifice. The grenades were distributed with care, one per person. The soldiers demonstrated the proper technique. Hold the grenade close to your chest, pull the pin, count to 3. The explosion would be instantaneous, painless. Several girls asked questions. Would it hurt? No. Should they wait for the Americans to enter the cave? Yes, if possible, to take the enemy with you. Could they write letters home first? There was no way to send them. Yoshiko Sakamoto's diary entry from that night is a single sentence. I thought I would feel something. I feel nothing. The psychological mechanism at work was not unique to Japan, though its application to adolescent girls in 1945 Okinawa reached an extreme rarely documented. Scholars would later identify the process as heroic doubling, a dissociative state where an individual separates their sense of self from the actions they are about to perform, reframing self-destruction as an act of transcendent meaning. The girls had been primed for this reframing since childhood. Every moral lesson, every patriotic song, every story of samurai valor had constructed a narrative framework where death for the emperor was not tragedy, but apotheosis. Add to this the immediate context, weeks of unimaginable suffering in the caves, the constant proximity of death, the exhaustion that makes any ending seem like relief, and the grenade becomes less a weapon than a sacrament. Psychological studies of cult mass suicides would later identify similar patterns: the Jonestown Massacre, the Solar Temple deaths. The mechanism is consistent. An authority figure frames death as transcendence. The group's isolation prevents external reality checking, and the alternative, continued suffering, becomes unbearable by comparison. The difference is that in Okinawa, the authority was not a fringe cult leader. It was the nation itself.
But here is what the Imperial propaganda apparatus did not anticipate, could not account for, would spend decades trying to erase from collective memory. Some of the girls refused. Not in dramatic speeches, not in open rebellion. The totalizing nature of wartime Japanese military culture made that impossible. A direct refusal would have resulted in immediate execution, probably at the hands of fellow soldiers who had internalized the same ideological framework. Instead, resistance took subtler forms. Miyoko Yasutake, 17 years old, accepted her grenade, bowed, returned to her corner of the cave, and quietly loosened the pin until it would fall out at the slightest jostle, rendering the weapon inert. She would survive the war, and decades later testify that at least 6 other girls did the same. Kimiko Higa, 15, lost her grenade during an American artillery barrage, dropped it during the chaos, she claimed, while helping a wounded soldier. No one questioned this. By late May, exhaustion and trauma had shredded the command structure's ability to track individual equipment. The officer who might have enforced accountability had been killed 2 days earlier by a naval shell. And others, dozens of others, simply waited, held their grenades, listened to the American voices growing closer, and in the final moments, when the choice between pulling the pin and raising their hands became immediate and undeniable, chose survival. This was not cowardice. Calling it cowardice accepts the ideological framework that defined suicide as duty. These were acts of profound courage, the courage to reject a narrative that had structured their entire existence in real time, under unimaginable pressure, with death as the consequence of being wrong. The American soldiers who entered the caves in early June encountered scenes they struggled to process. Corpses, yes, hundreds of them, military and civilian mixed together, but also survivors. Girls in tattered school uniforms, blank-eyed with trauma, holding unpinned grenades like talismans. Others who had pulled the pins and survived when the grenades malfunctioned. 40-year-old fuses degraded by cave humidity, a quality control failure in a Nagoya factory in 1937 that saved lives in 1945. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, a Marine who entered multiple cave systems during the Okinawa campaign, recorded his experience in his memoir, With the Old Breed. We found the girls in the back section, maybe 20 of them, sitting in rows like they were waiting for class to start. Some held grenades in their laps, just held them. When they saw us, a few started crying. One girl, couldn't have been more than 15, stood up
and held out her grenade like she was handing in homework. She said something in Japanese. Our interpreter was shaking too hard to translate. He just took the grenade and told us to get them out. We carried them out into the sunlight, and I swear to God, some of them had never been outside in weeks. They couldn't stop squinting. The casualty statistics for the Himeyuri Student Corps remain disputed. The Okinawa Prefectural Archives list 123 confirmed deaths from the original 222 students and 18 teachers. Other sources suggest the number was higher, complicated by corpses too damaged to identify and students who fled into the countryside and died of starvation in the weeks after combat ended. What is undisputed, at least 97 survived. 97 girls who were handed grenades and told that dying was the only honorable choice, who, in circumstances designed to eliminate the possibility of refusal, found ways to refuse anyway. The epilogue of the Himeyuri Corps did not end with the war. In the decades that followed, Japanese society grappled with how to remember Okinawa, and especially how to remember the child soldiers, the suicide attacks, the civilian casualties that approached 1/3 of the island's population. The narrative that emerged in the 1950s and 60s, shaped by conservative political forces and a government invested in rehabilitating Japan's wartime image, emphasized tragedy but avoided accountability. The Himeyuri students became symbols of innocent suffering, their story told in ways that carefully excised the uncomfortable questions. Who gave them the grenades? Why were children on the battlefield? And what does it mean for a nation to ask its daughters to become shrapnel? The surviving members of the Himeyuri Corps spent years navigating these narratives. Some refused to speak publicly, the trauma too vast to articulate. Others became advocates for peace education, visiting schools across Japan to testify that the glory promised by wartime propaganda was a lie drenched in blood and cave mud. Yoshiko Sakimoto, who never pulled the pin, who hid her grenade under a corpse and surrendered to American soldiers on June 4th, spent 40 years as a middle school teacher in Naha. She never taught history. She taught mathematics, which she said felt clean in comparison, free of the ideological freight that made discussing the war unbearable. But in 1987, when the Okinawa prefectural government proposed sanitizing the Himeyuri Memorial Museum's exhibits to avoid distressing visitors with graphic details, she broke her silence. In an interview with the Okinawa Times, she said,
They want to remember us as cherry blossoms, falling beautifully. We were not cherry blossoms. We were children covered in shit and blood, holding weapons we didn't understand, dying because adults had run out of other options. If that's distressing to hear, good, it should be. Remember us as we were, not as you wish we had been. The museum's exhibits remained unchanged. There is an object preserved in the Himeyuri Peace Museum in Idomon City, Okinawa, Japan, Case 47B, behind glass that is cleaned twice daily and monitored by humidity controls more sophisticated than those used for the Mona Lisa. A Type 97 hand grenade, unpinned, discovered in the limestone cave system beneath Shuri in 1953 during construction of a memorial. The pin lies next to it, carefully placed, not torn out in panic. The rust on the grooved metal body suggests it was handled often, held tightly enough to leave the faint impression of fingers in the oxidation. No one knows which girl held it. No name is attached to the artifact. It represents all of them and none of them simultaneously. Visitors, mostly Japanese schoolchildren on educational trips, some American tourists, occasional veterans in their 90s now, stand before the case and try to imagine the weight. 800 grams of metal, the weight of a textbook, the weight of a life condensed into a single choice. But the grenade is not the most haunting part of the exhibit. Next to it, preserved in archival plastic, is a scrap of white cloth, a headband. The name written in careful brushstrokes has faded to illegibility, the ink dissolved by decades of cave humidity before recovery. It could be any girl, that is the point. The placard beneath the display, in Japanese and English, reads, "They were told that death was honor. They were children. Remember the difference." This is what empires do when they run out of soldiers. They redefine who counts as a soldier. They hand grenades to girls in school uniforms and call it patriotism. They transform education into a conveyor belt towards self-destruction and call it moral instruction. And then, decades later, when the empire has collapsed and the caves have been cleared and the survivors have grown old, the nation builds museums and talks about tragedy in the passive voice, as if the grenades simply appeared, as if no one handed them out, as if the orders came from nowhere. But orders always come from somewhere. Grenades are always given, not found. And the girls of Okinawa, who carried weapons meant to kill themselves, who were told that their bodies were the emperor's final ammunition, they deserved to be remembered not as symbols, not as metaphors, not as beautiful falling petals, but as children who should have been studying mathematics and writing poetry and arguing about boys and dreaming about futures that extended beyond the darkness of a cave and the cold metal of a pin waiting to be pulled. Some of them made it out. Some of them refused, in the only ways available, the script written for their deaths. That refusal, quiet, terrified, executed in the narrow space between total ideological capture and the irreversible act, might be the most profoundly human thing that happened in those caves. Not the willingness to die, the insistence against everything they had been taught that they deserved to live.